Alright, now you're saying, why don't you tell me about some examples, Grandpa, of the severe weather? And talking about severe weather, it's 11:30 a.m. here in Mumbai, which means it is hot on June 2nd today. Monsoon has not arrived to Mumbai yet. It has arrived in the south, which means it's very hot. So I have a fan running in the back, which is making a bit of a hissing sound that may come through in the podcast, but you know that we are living through climate change and trying to use as little energy as possible. So let's look at some examples then. In August 2016, maybe before you were born, but maybe you were born, 2 feet of rain fell in parts of Louisiana in just 3 days. Is that a lot of rain? Well, depends on where you are. Louisiana is a state on the Gulf of Mexico in southern US, and it has of course rainy season and gets heavy rains, but not so much rain. 2 feet of rain in 3 days is a lot of rain for New Orleans. What does it mean? It means New Orleans is built over time with the known amount of rain they expect, so they build drainages and sewage systems and other things to get rid of the water for the expected amount of rain. But if it rains much more than that, then the system cannot handle and the water doesn't flow out to the ocean. It just accumulates here and there and creates situations that we talked about, like this one here. Okay, so that's an example. Climate scientists at the time took note the odds of an event like this have increased over the past 100 years by at least 40%, which is tricky because in Louisiana warming may be clear, and increases in extreme events like heavy rainfall of 2 feet in 3 days may be increasing because now you have enough data to show that this is what is happening. But there may be other places where summer heat may be increasing. There may be other places where winter storms are getting very nasty, and there are places which may be getting cyclones and floods coming in, and so on and so forth. So everywhere you have different things happening, and you have to have historic data, information from the past to say things have changed. And some people say, well, they always change, so what's the big deal? But there are ways to say, using models and data, that we can argue scientifically that this change, this increase in odds of an event of heavy rain have increased because of warming, which is because of increased greenhouse gases, which is because of us burning fossil fuels, and so on. Okay, so Princeton University researchers have talked about this. In Princeton in New Jersey on the east coast of the US, you have a very nice lab called the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab of the National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration, NOAA. You can go on the web and say NOAA and you will get a lot of information. They do the weather forecast and the climate forecast for the United States. Okay, 1 year later, in August 2017, Hurricane Harvey dumped more than 4 feet of rain over parts of coastal Texas, which is also a part of it. Its east coast is on the Gulf of Mexico, and set a new record for continental United States in terms of the amount of rain in a given time. 4 feet of rain over this part during the Harvey. No other storm had ever dropped so much rain. So you have to worry about whether the storms are getting stronger because of global warming and climate change, whether they are bringing more rain, or whether they are also becoming more frequent, and are they coming further north? If you remember, the cyclones and typhoons and hurricanes are born in the warm waters in the tropics because they get a lot of their energy from the ocean. Ocean has to be warm, and warm oceans are in low latitudes. But once it's born, it can begin to take energy from the ocean and leave it cold and keep moving, looking for more and more energy. And when it gets on land, So much water energy is not available. Remember, water has to evaporate and condense in the tornado or the hurricane or the cyclone or the typhoon to keep it going. If it hits land, it may not get so much energy, then it can just fall into pieces. But it may fly around with very, very strong winds. You may have heard about the scales of how strong the cyclones and hurricanes are. You hear about category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now they're even discussing whether the number of categories have to be increased because they're getting so much stronger than before. Okay, so here is an example of how again you have a landslide and the road has been blocked off and the car is stuck on that side and the car is stuck on this side, and hopefully nobody got buried under the rubble and so on and so forth. Okay, commenting on historic flooding in Peru, South America in March 2017. The research director at the University of Colorado added this at 400 parts per million by volume of CO2 in the atmosphere. The question is not so much, is this event caused by climate change? The question is, which event is not influenced by climate change? If you have caused warming already, if it is 1.3 degrees C since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and all the weather is happening in a warmer world and a wetter world, so maybe every weather event has some component of the influence of global warming on it. So what about hurricanes? Are they connected to climate change? The answer is still being debated, because again, as I said before, we have to worry about, are the numbers increasing? Now strict evidence for that from the historic data. Are they getting more intense? Some evidence of that. Are they moving slower? And there are science questions behind it. When science is being debated, it doesn't mean we don't know what we're doing. It's just that we have to understand, because things are changing and they are changing rapidly, and we don't have past knowledge about it. In 2005, one of the deadliest hurricanes to ever strike the US soil hit Gulf Coast states, the Gulf Coast states such as Mississippi, Louisiana, which we mentioned, and Alabama. The city of New Orleans, Louisiana, that we mentioned, was hit particularly hard by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Waves of water poured into the streets, flooding 80% of the city. A lot of poor people got displaced. Many left the city of New Orleans and they have not come back, because the trauma of moving away and this worry about facing it again has kept people away. So here is another image of people standing on the roof surrounded by water because the house is underwater. 7 years later, Hurricane Sandy devastated the Northeast. Unexpectedly came into a region which is not so used to hurricanes. Entire towns in New Jersey and New York on the East Coast were underwater. Once again, the monster storms turned the nation's attention to global warming. Some studies say it's too early to tell if climate change was the main reason that those storms were so big, so intense, and dumped so much rain. Modern records only go back a few decades, so it's difficult to compare big storms of the past to more recent storms. But how do you think about it? You should think about risk. As I said before, if we are increasing greenhouse gases, which we know for sure because we can measure them, and if we know temperatures are warming and not uniformly, but global mean temperature is going up, which we know it is, and we know water vapor is increasing, and we know sea level is increasing, then do you want to wait to be sure whether climate change is causing more severe storms or more storms and more rain, more heavy rain, or do you want to start planning for a future which will be doing this more and more? So that's a question for the grown-ups, but you can begin to think about questions you want to ask your parents, neighbors, teachers, friends and siblings, and so on and so forth. So we'll come back and look at some very nice figures of Hurricane Sandy I took from Wikipedia, and we'll discuss a few more details about what Sandy did, but what hurricanes do in general. Remember, severe weather or something happens on the ocean like sea level rise, We always worry about it because it affects our lives, can kill people, can do harm to infrastructure like roads and bridges and shops and buildings, and houses can get blown away, and economies can get harmed in the sense people are producing things, selling things, and your parents are working and making money, and that is all economy. If there are lots of damages from extreme weather, severe weather, then their job may, be temporarily suspended, or the factory may get blown away and get damaged, and they may have to sit at home for some time. So all these effects on economy, on infrastructure, and there are health effects as well. When you have so much flood water coming into the house, you get the moss building up, which is bad for your health. You get a lot of pathogens which can make you sick, and children in fact get sick from severe weather all the time, and so on. So health and energy supply and roads and crops and food supply and everything can get disrupted by severe weather, and this is why we worry so much about it. Okay, we'll come back and look at a few pictures of Hurricane Sandy that hit New York and New Jersey pretty badly, and it did some interesting things, not just rain. So we'll look at that in the next podcast.